Okay guys, so in this video we're going to be talking about the chemistry of sunscreen.
Ultraviolet radiation, also known as UV rays, have a wavelength of 100 nanometers to 400 nanometers. There are three different types of UV rays: UVA, which makes up 95% of solar radiation and penetrates the deepest into skin, can cause skin cancer and indirect DNA damage, has the longest wavelength of UV rays. UVB rays, which is 5% of solar radiation, leading cause of skin cancer and causes direct DNA damage, has medium wavelength. UVC rays get filtered out by the atmosphere, have the shortest wavelength, and would be most harmful if they reached the Earth's surface. The amount of UV radiation changes based upon five main factors: the time of year, the time of day, latitude, altitude, and cloudiness. For the time of year, radiation is highest during the summer months. For the time of day, radiation is highest when the sun is at its peak. For latitude, the closer you are to the equator, the stronger the radiation. For altitude, the higher up you are, the less atmosphere there is to filter out UV radiation. And for cloudiness, the more the sun is blocked, the less radiation that gets through.
Okay, so on this slide, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how the sun is actually affecting our skin. So sunlight, basically, it's composed of these packets of energy called photons, which we've learned a lot about. And as we know, the light and the colors that we see produced by the sun are harmless to us, but it's the sun UV light photons that are actually causing the damage to the skin. So you have UVB rays, and what UVB rays do are they actually cause the physical burn and are the rays that can lead to skin cancer. And then UVA rays, which actually penetrate a little bit deeper into the skin, into the dermis, which you can see on the little picture on the right of the slide. That's causing things like premature aging. It's making your skin elasticity much, much worse. You get sunspots, wrinkles, things like that. So basically, the skin needs sunlight because it helps manufacture vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is really important because it allows for normal and strong bone formation. And within the skin's epidermal outer layer, which you can see in this little picture on the right, there are these cells that contain the pigment melanin. Now, melanin is actually a natural protector for the skin against the sun's ultraviolet rays. The problem is that too much exposure to ultraviolet or UV rays can cause sunburns, and then the UV rays can penetrate the outer and deeper layers of the skin, which cause all the problems that I talked about earlier. The skin is very, very complex. Literally in each cell in the skin, it's made up of thousands of different chemicals. But our skin is great at absorbing the light because we need it for vitamin D. But obviously it becomes more of a problem when we have prolonged exposure, and then it's causing the serious damage. So now I'm going to be talking a little bit about how sunscreen is actually working. So sunscreen is going to be made up of a very complex and long list of chemicals, but there's separation between them. So you're going to have your inorganic chemicals in sunscreen, which are going to be reflecting or scattering the light away from the skin. And then you're going to have your organic chemicals, and these are the ones that are going to be absorbing UV rays. So a little bit about inorganic chemicals. These will include minerals like zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. They basically are acting as a physical sunblock. What that means is that they're reflecting UV rays. A simple way to think about this is kind of how white paint reflects light. So you've actually probably seen this on pictures or in TV shows or movies of lifeguards with the sunscreen, the white sunscreen on their nose and their cheeks. That's basically what this is. The inorganic chemicals are just reflecting the light away. Now, along with inorganic chemicals, sunscreen also contain organic chemicals, and these are actually going to be carbon-based. Two examples of these are like avobenzone or oxybenzone. So instead of physically deflecting UV light, these molecules are actually going to be absorbing UV radiation through their chemical bonds. And then as the bonds absorb the UV radiation, the components of the sunscreen slowly start to break down and release the UV radiation back as heat. So that's how the organic chemicals are protecting our skin, which is pretty cool. Also, something that I sort of ended up finding in my research is that some sunscreens actually will have antioxidants in them, and antioxidants are super important. You can get them by eating any of the foods in the picture on the slide, but some sunscreens will actually have these in them because they're a great natural source that protect our skin against UV harm. And I thought that was just an interesting little thing to include in this slide as well. So now I'm going to be talking about what exactly SPF is. To be completely honest, I really wasn't sure what it even stood for, and I also know there are a ton of myths about how effective SPF 15 is versus SPF 50, and all of that, so hopefully I'll be able to kind of clear that up with this slide. So SPF stands for sun protection factor. It's essentially a measure of how well the sunscreen is going to be protecting our skin. But don't be fooled about the numbers, and I'll get to why that is a little bit later. Most sunscreens are protecting against UVB rays, which, just to reiterate as a reminder, are causing sunburns, which can lead to skin cancer. They not so often protect against UVA rays, so kind of as a little bit of advice, make sure when you're buying sunscreen to look for protection from both, because both obviously are causing harm. So in terms of the SPF numbers, so 15 and 30, they are accounting for how long it's going to take for the skin to get burned and to turn red. So, for example, if you have SPF 15, it's going to take 15 times longer for you to burn than you normally would. So, if you're very fair-skinned and you're very susceptible to getting sunburnt, let's say it takes 5 minutes. It's going to take 15 times longer if you're using SPF 15. And then likewise, if you're using SPF 30, it's going to take 30 times longer. Now, you should be using between 15 and 30. No SPF above 30 is any more effective than SPF 30. So SPF 50, 60, 80, 100, that doesn't make any difference. 30 is kind of the cutoff. And there's no sunscreen that is 100% effective. So if anything is advertised as that, you know that is a lie. So SPF 15, it's 93% protection against UVB rays, and then SPF 30 is 97%. And what that means, there's a picture on this slide that kind of helps take that, and you can visualize it. So if you have 100 photons that are coming from the sun and you're not wearing any sunscreen, 100 photons are going to be entering the skin. Now, if you're wearing SPF 15, it's 93% protection. Only 7 photons are entering the skin. And then if you have SPF 30 and it's 97% protection, you have 3 photons that are actually entering the skin. So you can see how big of a difference it makes when you're actually wearing sunscreen. It protects your skin immensely and can prevent a lot of potential damage. So that's why it's so important, and that's why using SPF 15 or 30 is probably the best way to go.
I'm going to be talking about inorganic versus organic sunscreens and the compounds that comprise each of those. So first, inorganic sunscreens or physical sunscreens. The most common two in America are zinc oxide and what was the other one? Titanium dioxide. So those are the two represented here. They're elemental or mineral compounds. So they're very basic. So titanium dioxide, just titanium bonded to two oxygens, and zinc just double bonded to one oxygen. And what those do, the physical blockers just reflect UVB and UVA rays off the skin directly. Titanium dioxide is a better protector against the UVB rays, whereas zinc oxide is a better protector against the UVA rays. But both of them are just a physical layer on top of the skin, and the way I like to think of it is if you're using like a castle analogy, then the inorganic sunscreens are like the wall, so they protect just on the surface level and don't allow anything to get past, but they don't protect against all wavelengths, and they're not like a be-all, end-all to sunscreen, and they're physical, so they're not like chemical compounds. Okay, and then you move to organic compounds like avobenzone, and you have UVA and UVB blocking sunscreen compounds. Avobenzone is the most popular UVA blocker in the U.S., mainly because it's one of two approved by the FDA, and also because it's fairly effective. So the graph here is just showing, here, let me move a little closer. The graph here is just showing how avobenzone reacts to irradiation over a period of 2 hours when exposed to high irradiation. So the dotted line is showing the wavelengths it's protecting against and how much it's absorbing under its initial conditions. So it's absorbing about 60% of the wavelength 350 to like 375, which is your prime UVA lengths. So it's protecting against those UVA rays. Whereas after 2 hours, and this is the original compound without the extra hydrogen. This is the original avobenzone. And then after it's irradiated, the peak wavelength is actually shifted down towards more of the, well, not even, it's actually below the UVB range, so it becomes an ineffective sunscreen after 2 hours. So it's basically just showing that the absorbance values will go down overall where it's necessary. So this is showing the importance of reapplication of sunscreen, because even when you have chemical compounds that are good absorbers of the sunscreen, as they like process the photons of light and dilute it, then they still reach like a max absorbance over time. And I think of this as like the moat. So if there's a castle, they're the moat. They're absorbing that light before even letting it pass into the skin. Oh yeah, and this is just like, as I talked about, this is the absorbance rate. So none of it is, the peak is still at like 70% absorbance. So a lot of it's still getting through. And this is just showing the difference in wavelengths that John and Nicole already talked about in the previous slides. So the UVB base is protecting against the lower wavelengths, and the UVA and UVB combined sunscreens, where you have multiple compounds like homosalate and oxybenzone and avobenzone, are protecting against higher wavelengths. And they don't show on this curve is the just UVA, which again would be more like the avobenzone one, so it'd be more like that. But the most popular sunscreens now are these UVB and UVA combined ones, because they protect against the full range. And it also is why broad spectrum sunscreen is the most effective, because it's protecting against the largest spectrum of of wavelengths, so UVA, UVB. And then this one is just showing different types of sunscreens and what their absorbance is. So you have zinc oxide, which is a physical or inorganic sunscreen, and then these two are just other compounds. And what this graph isn't showing, though, it looks like zinc oxide is just the best because it has the highest absorbance and among all wavelengths. But in reality, it's actually not going to protect that. Like it's probably has a shorter lifespan in terms of how long it will last before reapplication. And there's also the cosmetic problem that zinc oxide sunscreens don't rub in and are less likely to be water resistant than the chemical compounds. And then this is just a general graph of sunscreen absorbance curve. I mean, it's going to absorb most of the early lights in the UVB, as old sunscreens just used to be UVB protectors, because that's what causes physical sunburn damage, but then the UVA causes the more direct DNA damage, which can cause skin cancer. But now they formulate more towards the higher end of that scale. Okay, and then finally, the associated risks of sunscreen, U.S. and internationally. There's very few risks for humans. Overuse of sunscreen may lead to higher photosensitivity over a long period of time, so you may become more prone to sunburn if you use it over a long period of time. Then there's new concerns of inhalation of fumes in spray-on sunscreens, and then also there's minor concern of nanoparticles in cosmetically developed physical sunscreens slipping into the bloodstream, which has been seen in rodents, but it's still not really believed to be a problem in humans. And then the biggest problem is obviously environmental damage. Coral bleaching, oxybenzone has been shown to cause coral bleaching, as it causes coral to expel their zooxanthellae, causing mass coral bleaching events, so that the environmental damage is much worse than any human damage caused by the sunscreen.
Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.